Under the guise of fighting alleged man-made global warming, California Governor Jerry Brown, shown, is defying the elected government of the United States and forming an unconstitutional alliance with the mass-murdering communist regime enslaving mainland China. Responding to U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to kill the illegal United Nations Paris Accord on climate change, Brown and his radical allies were foaming at the mouth, vowing to join forces with others to resist while calling the president insane. By contrast, Brown and his allies were busy praising the murderous dictatorship in Beijing as a heroic and progressive leader for the world in the supposed fight to save humanity from the gas of life known as carbon dioxide. Critics were perplexed by the California governor's bizarre behavior. Some prominent analysts referred to Brown's actions as illegal, pointing to the Logan Act that bans U.S. citizens from negotiating policy with foreign powers without specific authorization from the U.S. government. Others even invoked the T-word, referring to Brown's actions as treason against the United States. Either way, the significance of the developments would be hard to overstate. In essence, an array of state and local officials are defying the law, the Constitution, and common sense by forming alliances with hostile totalitarian governments to undermine U.S. foreign and domestic policy. In a statement released before his trip to Beijing last month, Governor Brown, a Democrat, outlined his positions. Donald Trump has absolutely chosen the wrong course, Brown argued. He's wrong on the facts. America's economy is boosted by following the Paris Agreement. He's wrong on the science. Totally wrong. California will resist this misguided and insane course of action. Trump is all but California is on the field, ready for battle. Also on the field, ready for battle is the regime ruling mainland China, which has murdered more human beings than any other government in human history. Before becoming president, Trump said the man-made global warming theory was a hoax concocted by the Chinese regime to undermine the U.S. economy. Ahead of Brown's meeting with communist Chinese dictator Xi Jinping on Tiananmen Square, where the People's Liberation Army massacred student protesters in 1989, the California governor became increasingly extreme. China is emerging as the leader on climate change for the world, Brown was quoted as saying by the Bay Area news group before leaving for his trip to meet the dictator and solidify ties between the two governments. Blasting Trump for supposedly being all, Brown painted a dire picture of looming climate apocalypse. "We can't wait. This is an existential threat," claimed Brown, sometimes ridiculed as Governor Moonbeam. "The ice is melting, the temperature is rising, the habitat is being destroyed. We have to make a turn, as humanity, if we want to survive." As Brown was attacking the President of the United States, who was elected by the American people, as some sort of enemy, the rogue governor was simultaneously using secessionist rhetoric while touting the brutal dictatorship in China as a source of inspiration and leadership. "It is a little bold to talk about the China-California partnership as though we were a separate nation, but we are a separate nation," Brown said, adding that California was a real nation-state. "We're going in the opposite direction of Donald Trump," Brown added, referring to his government and the Chinese regime. Brown even signed an agreement with the dictatorship vowing closer cooperation on climate change. More than a few analysts spoke of Brown's illegal alliance with the murderous dictatorship and other governments as a confederacy uniting against the American people. Brown is hardly alone. Compounding the problem, a number of radical globalists and statists in the United States, including dozens of far-left mayors and alarmist governors, are following Brown's lead in joining forces with murderous and hostile regimes against the duly elected U.S. government to uphold the illegal UN pseudo-treaty on climate negotiated in Paris. Among the extremist state governments working to form unconstitutional alliances with hostile foreign powers and each other are Washington State, New York State, Vermont, Massachusetts, Hawaii, Rhode Island, and more. Also joining the bandwagon are numerous mayors of American cities. Other far-left governors also boasted of their unconstitutional activities. The White House's reckless decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement has devastating repercussions not only for the United States, but for our planet, declared New York Governor Andrew Cuomo in an official statement announcing the climate alliance with the leaders of California and other states. New York State is committed to meeting the standards set forth in the Paris Accord regardless of Washington's irresponsible actions. The bizarre declaration was translated into Chinese, Russian, and French for good measure. Of course, all of it is blatantly illegal and unconstitutional. In Article 1, Section 10, for instance, the U.S. Constitution very clearly prohibits the very actions Brown and his allies have been boasting about. No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, it says. As if that was not clear enough, Article 1, Section 10 also says, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, enter into any agreement or compact with another state, on with a foreign power. Separately, multiple federal laws, including the Logan Act, are also apparently being violated by the rogue mayors and governors plotting to undermine the elected government of the United States through unconstitutional actions. Katie Grimes, an investigative journalist and a senior media fellow with the Energy and Environment Legal Institute, was among the prominent voices to level charges of treason. Brown should be investigated for colluding with a known foreign enemy upon his return to the United States, a federal republic of 50 states of which he is but one governor, she wrote, blasting Brown's treasonous trip to China. It is unconstitutional for a state to supplant federal powers and act on its own when dealing with other nations. Brown's latest trip to China to enter into a treaty as a sovereign nation is unconstitutional on several levels, and violates the Logan Act. Grimes also noted that this is not Brown's first dip into the treason pool. Citing various illegal alliances Brown has formed with foreign governments and other states, she suggested it was time for the federal government to intervene. Governor Jerry Brown's trip of treason should be a real trigger warning for the U.S. Department of Justice, Grimes said, echoing the concerns of other analysts and experts. Brown, meanwhile, was boasting that he runs a powerful state government and that there are 9 other states that agree with us. Grimes pointed to the extremist financiers of the treasonous scheming, too. Billionaire globalists and crony capitalists such as Tom Steyer, Michael Bloomberg, the Rockefellers, and George Soros. Another prominent analyst to invoke the specter of treason was Daniel Greenfield of Front Page magazine. States cannot and are not allowed to unilaterally choose to uphold a treaty rejected by the president, wrote Greenfield, adding that the Paris pseudo-treaty had never even been ratified by the U.S. Senate as required by the Constitution for all treaties. Their leaders are certainly not allowed to travel to enemy nations to inform foreign powers of their treasonous designs and to solicit their aid against the policies of the United States government. This is all the more treasonous at a time when the United States is on a collision course with the People's Republic of China over North Korea's nuclear weapons and trade agreements, he continued. Like the slave owner class, leftist elites are letting the arrogance of their wealth lead them into treason. This is a treasonous situation that is more troubling in some ways than the original Civil War because it involves states making open alliance with enemy powers such as China and welcoming them in. State governments are undermining the united front of the national government in the face of the enemy. Blasting Democrats and the treasonous Democrat media for cheering the betrayal while waving their arms over Trump's alleged connections to Russia, Greenfield also called for the feds to crack down on the treasonous behavior before it spirals further out of control. Their actions are in violation of the United States Constitution. And all this is another dark step on the road to another civil war, he warned, citing the blatant violation of the Logan Act as well. If the Climate Confederacy is not held accountable for its treason, the crisis will only grow. Even radical left-wing publications that buy into the increasingly discredited man-made warming theory have noticed what appears to be happening. States and cities are forming a kind of parallel national government around climate change, explained global warming theorist and far-left activist David Roberts in a July 1 article at Vox, a prominent globalist leftist online journal. A coalition is forming. A blue America, and at least on climate change. It is going beyond mere resistance to a more proactive role, negotiating with the international community on its own behalf, like a separate nation. Of course, there is a place for state governments to defy the feds. If the federal government is engaged in unconstitutional behavior, states have not just a right, but a duty to resist. In fact, some of America's most important founding fathers declared that nullification of unconstitutional usurpations by the U.S. government was the right remedy. However, in this case, the opposite is happening. The coalition of rogue governors and mayors are brazenly violating the Constitution, all in an effort to support an unconstitutional pseudo-treaty based on debunked pseudoscience that is rejected by most Americans. The Trump administration should make clear that such lawless behavior will not